Understanding the spread of languages in India. So in this session, we would focus on the Aryan languages and the various branches of the Aryan languages. We would be understanding that with a very simple map of India. The major idea was the Aryan language extended from the north till the northeast and in the south till the regions of Goa and Maharashtra. So that was whole of the extension of the Aryan language. So if we mark onto the map of India, we would see whole of the north of India, including the northeast and the regions up to Goa and Maharashtra, were the areas where Aryan language was commonly spoken. However, the Aryan language had its own subsections and the way in which it is spread. So if we focus on the northwest frontier, which is the present day region of Pakistan, we would see the languages which are mainly Baluchi. Then you have the languages which are Ghalchah. Now these are the two important languages which were part of the northwest frontier. The region of Baluchi, which is the present day Baluchistan, and then you have the Ghalchah, which is the region of Pamir North. Both of these languages were very, very prevalent. The two important other languages were the Pashtu and the Pakhtu. Now, the difference between the two languages is important. Pashtu was a language of Kandhar, and this was a language which was considered as a soft spoken language. However, Pakhtu, as the name suggests, Pakka, that means permanent or hard, this was the language of northeast and this was relatively harsh. So that was a major difference between Pashtu and Pakhtu. However, both of these languages were close by, they were not very, very far off. And then another important language was Ormuri, and this was the Ormuri, and Ormuri was the language of Waziristan. So these were the languages that were spoken in the northwest. Now coming on from the northwest, we have the region which was known as the Dardic belt. Now Dardic belt, the languages were important. You have Kafir, Khowar, Kashmiri and Shina as the main languages, of which only Kashmiri is a language which has its own literature. No other language, neither Kafir nor Khowar and nor Shina, have a literature. So Kashmiri is the only Dardic language which has a literature, a very, very important concept that you must remember. Now coming on to the specification. So Kafir language was the region of Kafiristan. Then Shina was the language of Gilgit, similar to the Gilgit, which was the language of Pamir. Okay, Shina was the language of Gilgit, and Khowar was the language of the Chitral region. So those were the areas and the respective languages. Now next to this, we focus on the language structure which was most prevalent, and this was the most common language, and this was the Western Hinduism language, or the Hindustani language as it was called as. Now the Hindustani language had its various subdivisions. So it starts with the region of the main region, which is the Indo-Gangetic plain, we could say. The region and the languages in the region of Punjab were known as Bhangaru. Then you had the region of Braj Basha, as it has been marked here. Now Braj Basha was the major region of the central Ganga belt. So Bhangaru, which was the language of in the state of Punjab, Braj Basha in the central Ganga region. Then you had the languages which was Rajasthani, and Rajputana was the main dialect within Rajasthani. Some of the major languages that were commonly there was the Thareli, Jaipuri and Mewati. Now Mewati is also known as Bigota. These three were the important main dialects. Malvi was another major language subset that was seen in the region of Rajasthani language. So Mewati, Malvi and Jaipuri were some of the major languages that were seen. Besides the region of the Hindustani belt, we had numerous other subsections of the language. In the region of Punjab, Punjabi was another important language, along with the Lahanda, which was a language spoken in the regions of Punjab, the present day region of Punjab in Pakistan. So that was another language, and a subdivision was the Sindhi language, which was the language of the Sindh. Now the Sindhi language again had four subdivisions. Those were the Sikaria, Lari, Thareli and Kutchi. Now these four were the regions which were dominated by the Sindhi language, of which Kutchi was the language of the Kutch region of Gujarat. Thareli was the language of the Thar Desert, and from the Thar Desert the name was Thareli. Some of the versions have cited that as a language of Rajasthan as well later on. However, initially it was a language from Sindh. Saraki was the language of the upper Sindh region, and Lari was the language of the lower Sindh region. So from the Sindhi you had the upper Sindh region and the lower Sindh region. Now if you remember the map as such, you would be able to understand how this actually works, and therefore understanding a kind of visual picture becomes very important. So those were the languages of the north region. Coming on to the south. Now in the south, let's first focus on the eastern region. In the eastern region we have the areas of Baghelkhand, where you have Bagheli as one of the common languages. Then you have the region of Chhattisgarh, where you have Chhattisgarhi as a common language, and then the region of Awadh, which was one of the major regions in the north of the Bengal Bihar area, were the three eastern languages that were there. Again, on the west you had Gujarati as one of the major languages. In the south, Marathi was important dialect, and as you can see the boundaries, these were the boundaries of the languages that were spoken. The certain coastal areas were known as with the language Konkani. So these were the common languages, and in the east you had Bengali. Now Bengali was one of the major flourishing languages. A lot of literary work was done in Bengali during that time, and even western influences were seen with the region of Bengal. So those were some of the major regions. A further subdivision of Bengali region was seen in the region of Assam, and this was the Assamese language. So Assamese language was very colloquial, we could say, to the Bengali language, and most of the middle and the upper regions of Assam had this language sect which was commonly seen. So those were some of the common languages that were of the origin of Aryan. The categorization and the classification have been important. Among the Marathi language also you have a northern subdivision which was known as Khandeshi. Now Khandeshi was the region or the language of Khandesh. Khandesh was a section of Maharashtra, and the region around this was considered as a pure Marathi region as well. Konkani was a subdialect of Marathi language. So those are some of the highlights under the section on the Aryan languages in India. We would be covering many more interesting lectures for you. Stay tuned. Have a wonderful day.